Wallace. So, in the very next section of the text by Panchen Lozang Chökyi, he's taking an enormous step. He's moving from the limited domain, enormously important, but limited domain of examining the self and the absence of an inherently existent self, which again is so crucial to our very existence, the way we navigate through life, through space. Starting there, kind of creating a beachhead, starting, getting some certainty there, right in the center, right? And you recall in that analysis, there was at least one reference to the 6 elements, right? Earth, water, fire, air, space, and then consciousness. And that list, I'm quite sure, is meant to be inclusive. That is, everything within this phenomenal world in that fits within that matrix, within that context. And the previous analysis was to examine each of these 6 elements, earth, water, fire, air, space, and consciousness, and find that as one examines them, each one individually and then they collectively, that you're just nowhere to be found. And if you're nowhere to be found amongst them, well, you can check very briefly to feel if you might be found outside of them. And if not, well, that pretty well does it in terms of there being a you that is findable under analysis. And what that means exactly, of course, is a you that was already there before you designated it. Where the designation, the thought, the label, and so forth is quite literally a mere afterthought. Like a footnote on the presentation of the universe. Like, oh yeah, and we called it this. But it's a footnote. And then, of course, everything shifts all the way around. So we started there. And see that each of these 6 elements, again, individually, collectively, is empty of the identity of a person. And there's no such identity of a person found anywhere else. But what we didn't do in meditation, we won't do now either, but I would really encourage you to do it at your leisure, is to really linger in the awareness that I'm quite sure you know conceptually, you probably have no doubt about it, but experientially it can really linger. And that is not only are these phenomena of these 6 elements empty of I, but they're also empty of mind. And very often, we playfully say, I playfully say, that the cell phone, its status as mine is purely nominal. Of course it is. We all know that. We all know that for other people's possessions. That their ownership of things is merely nominal. Right? But we can check for ourselves to see whether we ever take the sense of ownership as something being objective. This is my spouse, this is my home, this is my body, this is my country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, my country. Not one of those inferior countries. The best one, that's mine, right? That's what we learned, that's what we were told. America #1. Greatest country in the world. Well, in some respects, yeah. I think it's true in some respects. It's the greatest at being in the United States anyway. So, but examining, are these elements any less empty of mine than they are of I? And if we really see that, then that will change everything. To see that everything we identify as mine is just no more mine than the cell phone being mine. And that's pretty obvious, that it's just a cell phone. Right? It's seeing the cell phone as a cell phone. It's seeing form as form, feelings as feelings. You remember that whole thing? So that's big, but we're moving on now. But that's worth lingering there. Whenever you see a sense of mind coming up, check for yourself. How are you apprehending the minus of that which you are perhaps quite accurately identifying as mine? I could say, Amy is my student. I think I can say that, at least for a while. And Shelty tell me otherwise. She's one of my students, right? What is that more? Is that anything more than this is my cell phone? Or this is my chair? Right? This is my chair. If you sit here, prepare to get kicked out. At least when I'm here. And that's my cottage over there. Wherever it is, over there. That's my cottage. My cottage. That's my student. That's my student. Yeah? To see how utterly light that is. How just ethereal. Less ethereal than a cirrus cloud. Because that actually has some things to it. So, but not to linger. But this is really worth doing. To linger there. And as you scan through, this would be fun to do right now, but we need to move on. And we will. But to scan through, do that Cook's tour through the visual, the auditory, through the 5 physical senses, and then on into the mental domain. And to examine whether any of the appearances arising visually, whether the sense comes out mine. So as I gaze at Jeffrey's forehead, I see the color of his forehead, I see the patterns of his hair. Mine? Is it mine? Not really. Sound? Is that my voice? Or is it just a voice? Is that my finger snap, or is that an anonymous finger snap? That's anonymous, but my voice, that's quite distinctive. Maybe that's my voice. Or maybe it's just a voice that I've grown very attached to. And smell and taste, and then we get to touch. We get feeling. Oh, that's the sensation. That's my sensation in my knee. How am I as that? Those are my thoughts. One person was very disturbed, at least one person, but reporting to me, very disturbed by some of the thoughts that were coming up. A lot of mental afflictions coming up. In fact, I think 2 at least. We're coming, oh, I'm so disturbed. I'm so disturbed, being assaulted by these thoughts. Why? My thoughts. If they're assaulting someone else, that'd be no problem. But they're assaulting me because they're my thoughts. Or my thoughts of desire, my thoughts of craving, and so forth and so on. So, why are some appearances sensory? Tactile, yes. The other ones, not so much. Mental appearances, thoughts, emotions. Are they just emotions, or are they my emotions? And is the my more my than the ownership of a cell phone? Which vanishes as soon as I say, Claudio, this belongs to me, you can have it now. So, I said I wouldn't linger there, but it is an important area. We have to move on. We've done that, and at your leisure, look not only into the emptiness of I, but the emptiness of mine in any of the 6 elements. But then we move on. I said he's now making a major step to examine the 6 elements themselves and to see whether they exist by their own inherent nature, or whether they're empty of themselves. Right? Are they too, the 6 elements, are they as empty? This seems really wild, outrageous, like borderline ridiculous. That the 6 elements, earth, water, fire, air, for example, that their ontological status, their way of being, the way they exist, is just as fluffy, as insubstantial, as nominal as the ownership of this phone? That would be bizarre, wouldn't it? And that's exactly what they're saying. So as I said, I'm quite sure this is intended to be inclusive. And so the earth element, bear in mind this term is jungwa, and we translate it as element, has been long, I think it's okay. I just don't know of a better one, but we should know the etymology of this is, I think it's in Sanskrit Bhutta, and in Bhutta, and in Tibetan Jungwa, and both have the connotation of becoming, emerging, coming forth. Not just the Western notion element, like the periodic table of elements. Okay. Sodium, boom, chlorine, boom, iron, boom, copper, really like macho. That's what out there, that's what God sees. Right? That's what's really out there. From the God's eye perspective, inherently existent out there in the real world. That really brilliant chart They just found another element that fit in very nicely. So it was so neat. Yeah? You see that? New one came up. Yeah? Fairly brief. Very, very short. It goes, great, and gone. But still it counts. You got to vote. I'm in. I'm a member of the club. So, but that's not the connotation in the Buddhist view, because the Buddhist view from the very beginning, from the time of the Buddha, was not to represent a pre-existing universe as it is out there independently of any description, independent of experience. Because after all, it's all about Four Noble Truths. And suffering does not exist independently of experience. And the source of suffering, karma, klesha, doesn't exist independent of experience. Doesn't even come up, it's silly. Freedom, nirvana, notion that there's some kind of nirvana all hanging out there like a fruit hanging from a tree, you have to pluck it, independent of experience, completely silly. And the notion of a path, independent of experience, makes no sense at all. And that's the structure of all of Buddhism, the Four Noble Truths. And so it's all about loka, the lived world, the world, the Germans have it in phenomenology, Husserl, Heidegger, Lebenswelt, the lived world, the world that we live in, the world we experience, the world of our experience, right? That's what Buddhism has always been about. So that's why some people, some philosophers I know, are very, very keen on the interface between Western phenomenology and Buddhism, Madhyamik in particular. Okay, without lingering too long here, I have to keep on moving on. These were emergences, but they're emergences relative to experience. Because any entity that is irrelevant to all experience has no bearing on the Four Noble Truths. Right? Have no bearing, because the Four Noble Truths are all about experience. So if there's something independent of all experience, then who cares? You know. And so these are all emergences. Well, when speaking of, just for starters, the four elements, earth, water, fire, air, what these are referring to, of course, is anything out there. Look around. Those craggy peaks on the horizon, these soft, gently rolling green fields and hills and so forth. That which provides them with their solidity, just like the Higgs boson provides all particles with their mass, right? It provides them all with their mass. Well, that which provides the stability of the hills, of the trees, of metal, of your kneecaps, and so forth, that's earth element, right? And wherever there's fluidity, whether it's moisture, whether it's water, whether it's wine, whether it's oil, and so forth, any type of moisture, that which provides it with its moistureness is the water element. The whole gradient from cold to heat, that which provides the warmth of the sun, of the soil, and so forth and so on, that's the heat element. Stronger in some areas, colder on the others, right? And then wherever there's lightness and motility, wherever there's motion, including vibration, the wind, growth, movement, and so forth, that which enables the growth, the movement, and so forth, air element. So it has a different connotation, doesn't it, than a periodic table of, hardcore little nitty-gritty elements. Very Newtonian. Brilliant and extremely useful, and very, very Newtonian. And then we have the domain in which all of the constituents of the physical world, earth, water, fire, air, take place. And bear in mind, this goes from elementary particles all the way up to galactic clusters. It's said they're all composed out of earth, water, fire, air, in this Lebenswelt, in this world of experience. So it's not in competition with the periodic table, because that's not a world of experience, that's purportedly describing what's out there independent of our experience, that we are representing with our definitions of the various elements and so on. So that which in which all of these events are enabled to take place, of course, is the space element. The space element. So we know a lot about space. So much is written about it. And we experience it. And then finally consciousness, and I would say here in this context, consciousness, if this is indeed an inclusive set of the 6 types of emergences, then consciousness, this term consciousness refers not only just to the flow of awareness, but all configurations of consciousness. So thoughts and images and dreams and emotions, desires, memories, fantasies, the space of them, and all of these activities of the mind, all these formations of consciousness, they would be included there. And if we understand consciousness in that way, and not just the flow of awareness, then maybe we're done. Maybe that's inclusive. And then the question comes, and that's where we're going right now, is all right, these 6 elements, this is not a dualistic vision of reality. By my many friends who are scientific materialists, one is a very, very good friend of mine, very, very fine scientist. And whenever he refers to my worldview, he said, you're a dualist. Where he's a materialist, he's a monist. Everything really boils down to matter and its emergent property. That's what he was taught. Because his training in neuroscience was entirely based on 19th century physics. And so when I sent him a paper, and this is a very intelligent man, but when I sent him some material on quantum cosmology, he just basically rolled his eyes and said, I don't have a clue what this is about. I don't know. I don't have training in physics. He had enough to be an outstanding brain scientist. And you will have no idea who I'm, if you think it's Richie Davidson, it's not. So you're not going to guess who I'm referring to. But he just couldn't relate to it at all. Because it played no part, 20th century physics played no part in his whole training. He's a senior scientist now, world reputation. And he looked at this and said, I can't make heads or tails of that. I don't even know how to start. So how do these exist? So he refers to me in a very friendly way. We've had friendly debates and discussions and so forth. Good friends. But he regards me as a dualist because I think of the mind as something other than matter, an emergent property of matter. And I always counter, I keep on saying it over and over again. It doesn't really seem to sink in. I'm not a dualist, I'm a pluralist. Because space is not composed of matter. He believes in space, I believe in space. So he believes in matter and space. He's already a dualist. Even if consciousness is just an emergent property of matter, he believes in space, so he's a dualist. But he's not a dualist. We also believe in time. Time is not composed of matter. So he's a trilogist. And then I believe in consciousness too. I'm a quadruplist. Except for I believe in all six domains. I'm a sex addict. I don't know what the word is. It just came to mind. So how do they exist? Well, that's where we're going right now. That was much longer a prelude than I thought. But it's important. We're now going large. We could just go around thinking, well, individuals are empty of an inherent nature inside, but we exist in interdependence in this real physical world out there, which scientists are doing a magnificent job of representing with their myriad branches of science. Right? And now he's about to pull the rug out from all of reality and ask, okay, he's not questioning whether the 6 elements exist. Of course they do. Is there solid stuff out there? Is there hot stuff out there? Fluid? Things in motion? Of course there is. Is there space out there? Of course there is. Of course. Not in question. Any more than I'm here and David's there. Yeah. Let's get on to something interesting. How? In what fashion? And do these manifestations, these configurations of earth, water, fire, and of course combinations, mud, combination of earth element and water element, and so on. Thrown mud, earth, water, and motility. Heat it up a little bit, hot thrown mud. Have all 4 elements all at once. It appears to be really out there, right? Do you grasp it out there? So let's find out. Okay? But we're going to go right back into the lab, and the lab is awareness resting in its own nature. And then branch out from there. Please find a comfortable position. We'll jump in. So we've already asked how do we exist, each of us individually. Covered that. Been there, done that. And now we just move on to how does everything else exist? Other people, environment, physical universe. How does everything else exist? I think it's very important as we're venturing into this material, which is so central to the whole Mahayana tradition and Dzogchen Mahamudra, that we read it with the advantage of reading it from the 21st century and not from the 19th century. Because from the 19th century, this just doesn't fly. It just doesn't fly at all. if 19th century physics is correct, all of this is hogwash. It's just religious mumbo-jumbo. And it's important to recognize there are enormous, extremely powerful vested interests within academia, within the scientific community, within business and the media. And business, for example, the pharmaceutical industry. Enormous vested interest to maintain the status quo of metaphysical realism, because it seems like the whole credibility of science depends on that. If scientists are not describing what's really out there, what the hell are they doing? Making up worlds? Eeny, meeny, miny, mo? They sound like a bunch of California hippies. It's my reality, dude. Oh no, it's my reality. They sound like a joke. And that's the first thought. If Stephen Hawking and Thomas Hertog are right, then, well, if they can make up their stories, then why should they have the franchise? Why only scientists? Why can't the poets, the philosophers, the artists, the gardeners, why can't they make up their own reality? If there's no reality out there, if there's no history out there of what really took place, how about religious fundamentalists? Why not just say, hey, if the creationists think there is six-day creation, that's true for them. It sounds like it's a grab bag, which means there's no truth at all. It's just whatever you like, as you like it. So the forces to preserve the status quo are monumental, enormously strong. There's so much money, so much prestige and power embedded in maintaining metaphysical realism, and of course within that context, scientific materialism. I read the press a lot, and I virtually never see it challenged. New York Times, I can't remember the last time New York Times. I read it every day. I can't remember the time that they challenged that. They'll cite a person who says, that consciousness doesn't exist. They're happy to cite that. But the notion that consciousness might actually play a pretty important role in reality never comes up. And that's for all the other major media that I look at on a regular basis. They've bought in, and they are preserving that. Just as they made Donald Trump a celebrity. If he didn't have the support of the media, he'd be an unknown, quirky, weirdo New York businessman who inherited $200 million and had a lot of fun with it. So what? So enormous vested interest there. And so there's brilliant science that isn't being covered. And I'm about to read you some of it. Just so that when we launch back into the 17th century text, we're launching back from the 21st century and not from the fictions of the 19th century. Because that, every decent scientist, every knowledgeable physicist knows that 19th century physics was completely, in terms of its underlying metaphysical assumptions, disemboweled. Absolute space, time, matter, energy, and the notion that the universe consists of these little tiny nuggets of independently existing electrons and so forth. It's blown to smithereens. I think we'll never get it back, right? That doesn't come up much in the popular media. And even at the Higgs boson, the Large Hadron Super Collider, where they have about 3,000 employees, I understand. I've read about this, and I understand that they're among the physicists there. They have actually two different factions. And it's not like they're fighting anything, but just two different kinds of training. And some are very well versed in quantum mechanics. And the whole notion that particles, including the Higgs boson, do not exist prior to an independent of measurement. They're there. I mean, they're not censored. And then there are others who are metaphysical realists and say, we've discovered the Higgs boson, that real particle out there which imbues all other particles of mass. Two groups, very different ontological perspectives, living under the same roof. I think it's very cool. Because no one should be able to silence another group. Somebody's wrong, so we should just, in a friendly conversation, find out what. So let's turn now to, just briefly, let's turn back to André Linde. André Linde, brilliant, he's very distinguished. It's not just my opinion, it's an objective fact. Very distinguished astrophysicist at Stanford University, full professor there. He's Russian from origin, but has been doing research and teaching, writing in the United States for years. And he addresses here, and I'm going to quote him verbatim, and I'll show you exactly. It's a paper called Inflation, Quantum Cosmology, and the Anthropic Principle by André Linde. And he's addressing a topic I've been intrigued by for some time now, called the problem of frozen time. And that is when you apply the principles of quantum mechanics, the Schrödinger wave equation mathematically, you apply that to the entire universe and view the whole universe as a quantum system, rather than thinking of quantum systems as little places that you have to protect from the surrounding environment of classical physics, and then they disappear when you stop creating and nurturing them. Just viewing the whole shebang, the whole universe as a quantum system. Well, they've done that. A man named Bryce DeWitt and then his mentor John Wheeler did the mathematics for it, superb mathematics. And one of the odd things they found about the mathematics was when you view the whole universe as a quantum system, the element of time falls out. It disappears from the equations. And if time falls out, then the universe you're describing with that equation is static. The universe is static. Okay, nothing changes. Well, that's not how things look at all. But that's what the equation says. The time dropped out. There's no time. So it's called frozen time. That if that's all there is to the universe, then the universe should be and appear to be absolutely frozen. No time, everything static. Right? It's called the problem of frozen time. Here in Andre Lin's own words, he responds to that problem from the perspective of quantum mechanics, quantum cosmology. The resolution of this paradox, how could it be that the equation would say that the universe is frozen when obviously it's not? The resolution of this paradox suggested by Bryce DeWitt is rather instructive. I love the muted, rather instructive. He sounds British. It's rather instructive, but he's Russian. The notion of evolution is not applicable to the universe as a whole. In light of this frozen time business, the notion of transformation, evolution of the universe is not applicable to the universe as a whole, since there is no external observer with respect to the universe. And there is no external clock that does not belong to the universe. So he's suggesting, hey, we have no evidence for, we cannot even scientifically wrap our minds around the notion of there being some divine being who is the timekeeper, the great clockmaker, which was the medieval notion of God, one part of it. Okay, we can't deal with that scientifically, so let's not rely upon God to set the universe in motion. Otherwise, it's just not science anymore. Then we just call ourselves theologians, right? But we're trying to be scientists here. So we're not going to give God that status of enabling the universe to evolve, because that's just not physics anymore. It's straight theology. But also, there's no external clock that does not belong to the universe. So if the universe is changing, it has to change relative to some clock, some timepiece, but there's no external clock out there either, right? However, we do not actually ask why the universe as a whole is evolving. We don't ask that. We're just trying to understand our own experimental data. So this is a radically empirical question. Thus, a more precisely formulated question is, why do we see the universe evolving in time in a given way? Okay, so not whether it does, how it does, why it does. That's a good question. So then we know we're keeping real here, because it's very clear the universe appears to be changing, evolving. In order to answer this question, one should first divide the universe into two main pieces. First, an observer with his clock and other measuring devices. And two, the rest of the universe. Then it can be shown that the wave function of the rest of the universe, this is the Schrödinger wave function, the fundamental equation for all of quantum mechanics, when applied to the universe, then it can be shown that the wave function of the rest of the universe does depend on the state of the clock of the observer, that is to say, on his time, the time of an observer. Now, relative to the time of the observer, you can say the universe is evolving relative to that cognitive frame of reference. Because it's a cognitive frame of reference, not a spatial. We're not asking how fast that observer is traveling. It's irrelevant. That's not the question. But somehow we have to introduce time, and someone has to be aware of the time. Okay? So we now have two pieces. The observer with his clock and other measuring devices. And of course you make a measurement, and then the superposition state collapses and you have an actuality, right? And it happens at a certain point in time, right? Ordinary classic quantum mechanics. And then we have the rest of the universe. So now we have subject and object. But the subject is actually necessary for the object to be able to evolve. Then it can be shown, so this time dependence in some sense is objective, again in quotation marks or inverted commas. It's objective. The results obtained by different macroscopic observers, like us, living in the same quantum state of the universe, here we are in this collective reality, and using sufficiently good macroscopic measuring apparatus, agree with each other. In other words, there's intersubjective validation among multiple observers. But the observers are necessary on the subjective side with our clocks, our sense of time, and our measuring devices. And relative to that, we have the universe, and now, of course, the two are mutually interdependent. Because if you have no universe, you don't have any observers, at least not with clocks and measuring devices. But if you don't have observers with clocks and measuring devices, you don't have a universe that changes. And that's the empirical evidence, and that's the mathematical formulation as well. So this is science. It's not mumbo-jumbo. And then he adds, thus we see that without introducing an observer, we have a dead universe which does not evolve in time. This example demonstrates an unusually important role played by the concept of an observer in quantum cosmology. John Wheeler underscored the complexity of the situation, replacing the word observer by the word participant, and introducing such terms as a self-observing universe. Don't read that in the New York Times every day, or in Scientific American, or any of the major journals. It's there. And again, this is John Wheeler, this is Anton Seininger, it's Stephen Hawking, it's Andre Linde, it's Paul Davies. They're not flaky fringe physicists out there, smoking dope and just writing mumbo-jumbo. It doesn't get any better than these people. But it's not appearing. It's not common knowledge, even among physicists, let alone other scientists, let alone the general public. But this makes the whole notion of consciousness emerging from the brain as a little side product just completely a joke. Like, you got to be kidding. You couldn't have been more wrong. Imagine how you could be more wrong than that, if this is true, that consciousness is just a little function of accidental byproduct of sufficiently complex activities of neuron. It's just like a belly laugh, like, boy, if it said Captain Kangaroo created the universe, I guess that would be sillier. Not sure. So we'll pause there. But now we've planted ourselves in the 21st century, which is a good place to be. I mean, that's where we are. So from that perspective, let's go back to the 17th century text. Okay? So, we've just